Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwayne McFarland.
All across the fantasy universe, from up here in New York down to Texas, weaving our way around some tornadoes and into the back seat of someone's car. That's right. If you're watching us on YouTube, you know the Fantasy Football Hustle, powered by PFF, transcends houses, transcends studios, transcends automobiles, because Dwayne McFarland and I have a great guest. It's our good dear friend Jay Moyer from the FF Astronauts, and he's in the back seat of a Honda somewhere in San Francisco. Jay, Dwayne, what's going on, gentlemen?
Hey, man. I'm just excited to have Jay here. And I don't care if he's in a car, if he's in a van. He could be in an alleyway. He could be in a dumpster. I don't care. It's like, I want Jay on the show.
It's actually a Subaru. And we're out here in the East Bay, as you can see with my A's hat here. Got to rep the home team. And I'm in the front seat. So, let's not mischaracterize things too drastically here. But no, I'm super excited to be on the show. Obviously, a lot to talk about with the draft having just concluded last week. So can't wait.
We're so happy to have Jay back. And for those of you that have been with the show for a number of years, you obviously have heard Jay before. We brought him on last year after the draft. He's making his third appearance. It ties Matt Waldman for the most appearances ever on the Fantasy Football Hustle. So we're so happy about that. He's been doing killer work over at the Fantasy Football Astronauts. You can check out their stuff on Twitter at FF_astronauts or FFastronauts.com. They're crushing it on YouTube. That's all I saw was people talking this draft season about the work you guys did on prospects. This YouTube channel blew up. It made every wannabe fantasy analyst, all of a sudden they're Greg Cosell and they're Matt Waldman. They're grinding tape in their basement because of the kick-ass work you guys were doing over there. So it's going to be a fun hour, folks. We're going to talk about the rookies. We're going to talk about scheme fits. We're going to have a little film analysis versus data analysis. And can the two coexist? Because Dwayne and Jay, you may not know this, used to do a podcast together where they debated these two topics. And, we'll get into all that. But first, I want to tell you guys, PFF is the sponsor of the show. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle, sponsored or powered by PFF. And before I can even get into that, I got to be straight up with the audience. I like to be, transparent. I am beyond tired. I don't think I slept last night, Dwayne. Like, you ever have those nights where you just lay down and you just look at the clock and you're like, oh my God, it's like 12 o'clock at night. And then you're looking, it's 4. My wife gets up at 5:30, 6 o'clock. And I don't think I took 3 seconds of sleep last night.
Yes, I know those nights, and I hate them. It's like when you finally do fall asleep, you force yourself, the alarm goes off like 10 minutes later, and you're like, what? And then you got to get up, and you got to go at it. But it's okay, Drake. You got two guys here that'll help carry you along the rest of the way. We got it.
And if you want to get carried along to your fantasy football playoffs this year, you're going to need help. You're going to need people that know what they're talking about, and that's what we offer over at PFF.com. We got a special deal for you guys. Use promo code HUSTLE. Just type in HUSTLE as the promo code. You're going to save 25% off any PFF subscription. You're going to get access to all our fantasy football rankings, the locked articles, and the data that you can't get anywhere else. Trust me, if you look at any of my late night tweets, that's probably why I can't sleep, you'll see me trolling around PFF.com, and they gave a schmuck like me access to it. So I'm finding all this cool data to tweet out. You guys should do the same. Go over to PFF.com, use that promo code HUSTLE. So we said in our pre-show meeting, we wanted to come out swinging, Jay. And since running backs is kind of your thing, and everyone's getting ready for these rookie dynasty drafts, their super flex leagues, whatever's going on, they need to know which rookies am I taking. So right off the bat, give us your top 5 rookies now that we know landing spots in fantasy football.
Yeah, top 5 rookie running backs. I assume you.
Top 5. Brian? We're drafting. We need to know the order of these guys. Who are we taking?
But we're talking running backs or top 5 overall?
Top 5. Let's just go running back here.
Yeah, rookie running backs.
So for me, and we'll get into some of the nuance of this. Ranking these guys is sort of tough because I think it's clear for me who my number one back is, and that's Najee Harris. I really like the fit in Pittsburgh, not necessarily from surrounding talent standpoint, but just things we've seen them be willing to do in the past. I think it really fits his skill set, and we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 2 through 5 is tough because you have, in my opinion, a little bit of a talent and draft capital mismatch, and also situation and draft capital mismatch. The guys who I think are more talented runners got drafted later, and they're also in better situations than the guys who were drafted earlier. So you have sort of competing interests there. But, if you pinned me down and made me choose, I would probably put Javonte Williams as my number 2. I think from there I would go Trey Sermon and probably Michael Carter and then Travis Etienne at 5. Although, where Etienne's getting drafted in your rookie dynasty drafts, you don't really have to make a decision between Michael Carter and Travis Etienne because you can get Sermon or Carter much later than you would have to get Etienne. But that's probably how I would rank it out. And that is taking into account for me, where I see these guys as talents, where they ended up in terms of opportunity, and then also how the scheme fits their skill set. And then also, obviously, the draft capital. People will scratch their heads at Etienne at 5 because he was drafted in round 1. And for me, that's the biggest thing that he has going for him is just the draft capital that they spent to acquire him. So that's how I lay it out. But again, you're not going to have to choose between Travis Etienne and Michael Carter. And it's key to understand just the value of where you're drafting these guys.
So, Dwayne, let's get into it a little bit. We'll start at number 1 here with Najee Harris. The Steelers took him at the end of the first round. They had a plethora of other options that could have been used to help their team. Their offensive line is abysmal, but he's going to get all the opportunities. I went and looked at some FFPC best ball data. Najee Harris is coming off the board currently as running back 15 at the end of the second round. Pick 212 is his median draft position. So what's the lay of the land with the fit for Najee Harris?
Yeah, I think we talked about this actually on the show last Thursday after the draft. I think you tried to pin me down on where would he go. I think I said into the second round. I'm gonna have to go back and listen now, but I feel pretty good about it. I think that's probably where he stays. If he does really well in the preseason, though, you know how things can happen. Like guys can shoot up the board. So I think there is room for him to move up some, but he'll probably stay right around that spot. Like as far as his fit, I mean, I think Jay actually really set it up perfectly. Like he's the guy that has it all. He's got the draft capital in him. He's in a scheme that's a good fit for him. We've talked about Mike Tomlin before. He really likes to just have one back. He prefers his backs to be bigger. He talks about how he wants his running back, right, and his lineman to basically be like hand in glove. Like he believes that there's a true rhythm to the way the running game works that they orchestrate. And so I think there's a great chance for him to fill that role. I mean, he's a big guy. He's versatile. I know there's some concerns, and Jay can probably get into this better than I can, around his pass blocking. But it's not that he just can't do it. I know that he can be a decent receiver out of the backfield. He can handle all the carries inside the 5. I mean, he's got the body to really do everything, and he landed in the right place. He's got all the draft capital. You look at the rest of the backs on the roster, Benny Snell Jr., Anthony McFarland Jr., who was like a 5th or a 6th round pick last year, Jalen Samuels from three years ago. That hasn't quite worked out. They saw him really more as a guy, they would like to use as a receiver out of the backfield, but he hasn't even really been able to hold that kind of role down. So I really think it's all there for Najee Harris. I mean, I think where he's going is where he should go. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he outscores Jonathan Taylor in fantasy football. And the reason why is because I know Jonathan Taylor is going to have to share the backfield with Naheem Hines to some extent, just because he's got a coaching staff that's always done that. Whereas I know with Mike Tomlin, he's very willing to just go with Najee Harris. I see the offenses probably being similar. So I think, honestly, as long as Najee Harris doesn't do anything to lose the job in the preseason, we don't get some sort of new information, he's probably being drafted too low.
What did you see on film from Harris? I mean, obviously, he was in a fantastic setup down there at Alabama. He's running through holes. His seemingly his entire offensive line was drafted with or without knees by the Philadelphia Eagles. Give us a little background on Harris, because there are probably a lot of guys out there that just see the name. They go, oh, he's an Alabama back. I'm sure he's Derrick Henry. He's Mark Ingram. Who is this guy, and what are we going to see from him on the field in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, so Najee is a really interesting talent because he has really good size, and he's from Alabama. So people may think that he is a Derrick Henry style back. Mm-hmm. Very, very different running style than Henry. Henry is super efficient, north-south, much more explosive and faster than Najee, just in terms of getting up to top speed. What Najee is, he's more of one of those, big lateral jump cut movers like Saquon Barkley's running style. He doesn't have the athleticism of Barkley in terms of the top end speed, the acceleration, but just in terms of his running style. And for me, one of the biggest things that I look for in my backs that I like is just efficiency, especially if you're a guy who doesn't have really elite explosion or speed. And so that's my biggest concern about Najee, is he has a very inefficient running style, and he doesn't have the athleticism, really just the explosiveness and the ability to get upfield quickly like a Saquon does. Saquon is just an absolutely elite running back, so he can get away with a very inefficient style, and even he struggles with it at times, as we see. I've seen with these types of backs, their production is very inconsistent because a lot of it just depends on the quality of their blocking, whereas a guy like Dalvin Cook, who's so efficient, doesn't have those 15 carry for 29-yard gains games, because he's just picking up what's there. He's going to get the 3-4 yard carries instead of turning those short runs into a 2-yard gain or a loss or whatever. So I do have concerns about Najee as a runner, but that said, he is very physically talented. He breaks a lot of tackles. He's elusive. He has a nice hurdle, spin move, stiff arm, a lot of ways to defeat tacklers. He's going to break a lot of tackles. I think it will be a David Montgomery situation where he's breaking a lot of tackles for a 4 or 5 yard gain. That said, Dwayne hit on a lot of the things that you got to love about Najee in terms of his landing spot. Yeah, their offensive line is, sort of being rebuilt. Ben Roethlisberger's not what he was, but what do they do? They just throw quick game all game. Ben Roethlisberger's getting the ball out in 2 seconds. So does his pass blocking matter? No, not really, because they're getting the ball away as quickly as possible. They built their offense around Roethlisberger now being a veteran QB who can't really throw downfield that well or that frequently. So in that sense, it somewhat negates his weakness of just, I wouldn't say he's a terrible pass blocker, but he's just very inconsistent. But what he is, the best thing about him is, for me, is his receiving ability. You see him at Alabama, he's lining up out wide, he's running slants, option routes, angle routes, going across the middle, catching the ball with his hands, getting hit in the face, holding on to it, breaking a tackle. Very, very tough receiver, not afraid to catch it in traffic. And you saw them do this with Le'Veon Bell. A lot of NFL teams get their backs into sort of stereotyped roles. And so like a third down back, you want a scat back, right? A little small guy who's going to get out there and he's quick. The Steelers have shown that they're willing to let a bigger running back line up out wide and run a slant. Le'Veon Bell would do that all the time in his prime. So when you start talking about a guy who's going to be a workhorse, he is talented, even though I think he'll have some inefficiency. And then he has receiving skill that fits with a scheme that's going to allow him to catch passes. Those quick, short passes, a lot of those are going to go to the running back. So it really checks all the boxes for me. I also think he's a very smart player, and he will learn to adapt his rushing style to at least get a little bit more efficient. He does show flashes at Alabama of running with efficiency and anticipation and some of the things I really look for.
Hey, Jay, just real quick. What are your thoughts? I know you talked a little bit about the scheme, but with the Steelers really being one of the teams that run inside and outside zone the least, right, in the NFL. Last year they run inside zone 25%, but outside zone only 8%. Really everything else was either a power, counter, man type concepts. Do you think that helps a back like, Najee Harris that may have some inefficiencies in his game, but if he knows where he needs to go, does that typically work out better for him, or does he still have problems?
Yeah, I think that the Steelers are smart. They sort of adapt their running game to the guys they have. James Conner is a little bit less of a, good lateral mover, good cut guy. You sort of want him to find a seam, get into the secondary, break a tackle. Najee, I think that, having those in gap schemes, it's usually sort of a one gap read, a one block read. It's much simpler in that sense. So that could really help simplify things for him in the running game and just let him get, with those gap style runs, what you want to do is have the running back make one guy miss. There's usually one player who's not really accounted for in the blocking scheme. So in that way, that really fits his talent well in terms of being able to break a tackle or elude a runner or a tackler. I would expect that to continue and sort of continue the trend of a lot of power or counter, just sort of getting him to make one quick read, not overloading him, especially early on. You don't want to overload this rookie when he's already slated for such a big role with trying to, refine his vision, though I think that will come over time as he works into his career.
Let's get into Javonte Williams. He was your number 2 running back in your top 5 to open the show. And let's be honest, nobody's watching UNC football. I mean, geez Louise, I live in ACC country here. I'm not watching Syracuse play North Carolina. Forget about it. So Javonte Williams, and we're going to talk about another Tar Heel back, Michael Carter, in a little bit. But he's coming off the board right now as running back 24 in best ball. Around the middle of the 5th round. I found this interesting from PFF's Andrew Erickson, an article he did recently that said Melvin Gordon, who, by the way, his contract is up after this season, never saw a 60% plus snap share last season in games when Phillip Lindsay was healthy. Let's not include any of those Kendall Hinton games. So if we're suggesting a 60-40 split, Javonte Williams can really come in and make a name for himself. Last year, he averaged over 100 yards a game and well over 7 yards a carry. So tell the folks a little bit. We'll go to you first, Jay, and then Dwayne about maybe the fit he sees here in a split backfield. But who is Javonte Williams for the fans who've never seen him?
Well, Javonte is interesting because, he really cemented himself as sort of within that first tier of running backs in terms of like what NFL decision makers were thinking. It became Harris, Etienne, and Javonte Williams as the top tier of runners. I think in the evaluation space this year, first, it's not a deep or, super talented running back class. So I think there was a lot of hoping and wishing and ascribing things to Williams that I really don't see, and I don't think he is. A very common comparison is Nick Chubb, which for me, that is like, we're talking a top 3 running back in the NFL because, people see Chubb, he's breaking tackles, all this. What a lot of people do not see about Chubb is how skilled he is a runner inside. He's super efficient. He has great vision. He's not wasting space. He's not making bad reads. He brings a lot to the table other than the fact that he's very strong and can break tackles. And people see Javonte, who's very strong and can break tackles, and they say, oh, this guy's Nick Chubb. He's really hard to bring down in the open field. Well, what Javonte doesn't have is the vision. He doesn't have the decision-making. He's not nearly as explosive as Nick Chubb in terms of getting to top speed quickly. And that's not to say that he's slow. He's just not in the same physical ballpark as an athlete as Nick Chubb is. And then also add on top of that the efficiency issues that I talked about. North Carolina, as much as you didn't want to watch them, they had 2 really good running backs. And these guys split the load. And what's really interesting to me is that Michael Carter, for my money, was the better runner at North Carolina. He also was the starter. He also had more yards than Javonte Williams every year that those 2 played together, which was for 3 seasons. So watching these guys, it's somewhat surprising to me that Javonte became, sort of the hype wagon number 3 running back when he wasn't even the best running back on his own team. And the interesting thing beyond that is when you watch North Carolina, there's a very stark difference in how these guys were utilized. So Javonte Williams would run counter almost every time they would run him. It's counter, except for in short yardage. Then they would run him on inside zone or power or whatever. Michael Carter was the guy they used to run their zone plays. So he would mostly run outside zone. And why do teams do that? I already sort of touched on it. Those gap runs, counter, it's sort of a one block read. And Javonte Williams really struggles with his zone reads when he has to process multiple gaps. On a zone run, you're starting off reading one guy, but then you got to work your way across, 2, 3, 4 gaps, depending on how the play plays out. When that would happen, his mind would just sort of melt down. He'd end up running outside. You see times where he just sort of stops and gets put on his back by a defensive end. He's really has a lot of work to do to become an effective and efficient zone runner. And most teams in the NFL, Steelers accepted, run a lot of zone, because zone, like I said, you're reading a lot of gaps. So you teach one scheme, and the run can work its way out many ways. In the NFL offenses, most of the complexity is built into the passing game. NFL teams don't want to spend multiple days of installs on 20 different gap runs. If you have a few zone runs, those zone runs can play themselves out 5 different ways depending on what happens with the blocking. So it's just a lot more versatile than gap running schemes, easier to install. So I think in that sense, he'll really struggle. A guy that I thought was very similar to him in college was Zach Moss, another guy who broke a lot of tackles, had a decent amount of preseason hype, but last year's running back class was very strong. If Moss was in this class, I think he would have been built up a little bit more and probably would have gone earlier than he did. And you really saw the issues that cropped up in college, where you can make inefficient decisions and still get a 10-yard gain because you're just sort of the most physically dominant player on the field. Those things really bite you in the butt when you get out there on the NFL field. And Zach Moss really struggled to adapt. I think Javonte is in for a similar transition. I'm to be honest, when I'm doing my rookie drafts, where Javonte is going for like dynasty, I'm going to pick a receiver or a tight end or a quarterback ahead of him, because I'm not a strong believer in his talent. I don't think he's anywhere near Nick Chubb. The only reason I have him as number 2 is I think he's very likely to be given the chance to be a bell cow running back as soon as next year.
Dwayne, let's run with that. So, we don't know about Melvin Gordon. He even has a DUI issue. We'll see what plays out here as we go into 2021, but they're going to be probably rolling out a new quarterback with Teddy Bridgewater in Denver. Great weapons on the outside. Anything you see with this scheme or the fit with Denver that we should be eyeing?
Don't get Jay going on Drew Lock, dude.
Yeah, I don't like how you slipped that Teddy Bridgewater in there, man.
Hey, did you see the tweet I put out? Because I was scrolling late night in PFF's backyard, and I found that the 2 receivers in the NFL who led the NFL with the highest percentage of drops in on-target passes, whatever that means, Dwayne, you could probably fill me in. Number 1,
Jerry Jeudy.
Actually,
yes,
yeah,
Jay and I have already had this talk on
Jeudy.
Twitter. People just go look at the timeline.
Yeah, it's crazy. So again, folks, if you want to get crazy in those stats, use promo code HUSTLE, 25% off.
Exactly.
I'm a company man, if nothing else. I could be dead asleep, but I'm going to get that plug in there.
Yeah,
we can get into Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater.
We'll be here for another.
I'm not
2
drinking
hours.
during this show. I'm going to have some Blantons or something on hand for that.
Brian, you're going to go take a nap in a second, and Jay and I are we'll keep going. No, just real quick on Javonte Williams. I think Jay hit on a lot of it. I did look up. I thought Denver did run more zone than what I thought last year. They were actually the second most in the league in power concepts at 21%, 25% to the Ravens. And I did double check that just to make sure I had the right number. So they did run 18% outside zone, which is about middle of the pack. Inside zone, 24%, a little bit less. So, 42% of their plays were zone. So they're one of those teams that just kind of mix up a lot of the different stuff. So to Jay's point earlier, what they'll do with a lot of these backs, you'll see this mix up because they may do one thing with Phillip Lindsay last year and another thing with Melvin Gordon, right? And so you kind of got the same. You could have the same thing going on here. But I think the biggest problem for Williams, especially in redraft, Jay's talking more dynasty, is you do have Gordon in the way unless he gets suspended. Look, he's not going anywhere. He's going to be there for this year. It's going to be a split. I agree with Andrew Erickson. I think 60-40 is what you're hoping for. You're hoping it's not a 65-35. So if you're investing in him in dynasty, and you've got the patience, he does have a little bit more draft capital than some of these guys. I think, he could pay off, but I'm like Jay, there's just other receivers and even, the tight ends and even some of the quarterbacks, depending on the format you're playing in, that I really like, a lot more. And there's a running back below this that I just happen to just have a man crush on, and maybe I shouldn't, but we'll get into him in a minute. But I think, Javonte Williams, unless Melvin Gordon gets hurt, he's probably looking at 30-40% max of the work, and you're just not going to be able to use him in fantasy football. And so what pick's he going at, Drake? Would you say his ADP is already?
Is running back 34, middle of the 9th round for Michael Carter.
That's
Michael Carter.
Middle of the 9th round. And
Javonte Williams, is middle of the 5th round, running back 24.
Oh, see, too high. That's too high with a guy like Melvin Gordon in front of you. This is a different situation, than last year, looking at Cam Akers coming into a backfield where we didn't really know what Darrell Henderson was going to do. Malcolm Brown was just kind of an NFL journeyman. Like, Gordon's a legit running back in the league. He's been a good running back for a long time. I'm not saying he's great, but it's not going to be easy to displace him. I did that study last year where I put out, look, here's literally all the running backs that have come out, that have been in the 1st or 2nd round, and where they've landed behind somebody that everybody says is washed and old. And like 75% of the time, they couldn't even overtake the veteran in year 1. It doesn't happen as much as we think. So I'll have to go back and rework some of the data. It even happened last year, right? With most of the rookies. Akers didn't come on, until the very end of the season. And some of that was due, to injury. But it's tough for these rookies to come in and just completely take over a backfield when there's a proven guy that the coaches trust there. And I think that's going to be the problem for Williams in redraft. I think in Dynasty, I'm willing to take him, but I'm more along the lines with Jay. He's just his price is too high for me.
Running back.
Fire away there for a second,
please.
Just in terms of comparing Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, I mean, Melvin Gordon is not, he's not a top 5 or 10 running back in the NFL, but he is a very good runner, and he's definitely not washed. He's a good starting NFL running back. And Javonte Williams, all the stuff I just talked about, he's going to take a little while to transition to the NFL. It is very difficult to make huge strides in your vision, processing, decision-making year 1. The defenses move much faster in the NFL. The holes are smaller. It's a whole, step up or 2 in terms of degree of difficulty. So to anticipate that he would fix those problems all, going into this year when he has a very good veteran running back in front of him, I think there's a good chance the split is even less than 60-40. I'm with Dwayne. I think that is sort of optimistic, the 60-40 split. So, in terms of redraft in the 5th round, you're really just throwing it on a wing and a prayer that Melvin Gordon gets injured. And even then, I think that they would still have to work in other guys because I don't think Javonte is ready right now to be an every down running back in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree. And in most of those weeks, what you have to – one last thing. I know Drake's like, we got to move. Drake, I don't have you in my ear, but if I did, I know you're like, next guy, guys. People do just also want to dismiss Phillip Lindsay, which I hate. Like, he's better than what people think, right? And he did a good job, for what they asked him to do. So, I mean, who knows? Javonte Williams may not be as good as Phillip Lindsay already was, right, in year 1.
Right.
So, I mean, Lindsay was demanding touches because, he performed. He did a good job.
Jay, let's get your thoughts on Trey Sermon. Now, he was Matt Waldman's number 1 rookie running back, according to his RSP. If you want to hear more from Waldman, go back and listen to that show in our archives. He landed in San Francisco, which is legitimately the island of misfit toys. He's now in a jumbled mess with Raheem Mostert, who's on the final year of his deal. Jeff Wilson Jr., they added Wayne Gallman. You've got Jermichael Hasty, and they plugged in, I think in the 7th round, day 3, Elijah Mitchell. So a lot of competition here. I know Dwayne is a huge fan of this scheme. I'd love to hear what you think about Trey Sermon because he is going to be a sexy pick, although best ball drafters are not feeling it right now. RB 35 at the end of the 9th round. Wow, that's a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people think of Shanahan as this big committee guy, and that's what it's been the past few years. But that's not always what he's done. I think it's sort of somewhat by necessity over the past few years with the 49ers. The plan last year when they signed Mostert was to have him sort of be the lead back with, other complementary guys working in. But obviously Mostert got hurt early on in the year. The plan didn't really come to fruition. The way I see this backfield is I think Mostert and Sermon are going to sort of share the bulk of the load. Those other guys, they're all journeyman types for a reason. Jeff Wilson, I think, is a solid player, a guy that you want to have on your team, but not taking 20 or 30% of the snaps. In terms of Sermon's talent, in some ways, he's the antithesis of Javonte Williams. He's not necessarily, a big, strong, exciting physical prospect, but he does have a lot of refinement to his running style, really great vision, maybe the best vision in the class, all things considered. Just in terms of being able to process where everybody is on the field, anticipating where guys are going to show up. He had his big run against Clemson in the college football playoff is a great example of this. By far his best highlight, where he makes an excellent read through the line, gets into the second level, he eludes one guy, and then he's running, and there's a tackler coming from behind, and just somehow you don't even really understand how he sees the guy coming. He just sort of ducks at the last second, and really he just has such active eyes that he does stuff like this on a regular basis, where you're like, man, how did he even see that? How did he even do that? And I think it's really a good fit with Kyle Shanahan, who, he loves to run the ball. They have diversified, he's thought of as his outside zone coach, and that's still his base scheme for the running game, but he's really diversified the attack. They run a lot of different style of running plays, and I think Sermon is someone who could pick that up quickly, really fits well in the zone, outside zone scheme to begin with. And I think this year, I think him and Mostert, it's a toss-up for me as to who earns the biggest role. I lean Mostert at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sermon, has a lot to say in that backfield.
Dwayne, dig in. I know this is your guy.
Yeah, I mean, again, Jay's already hit a lot of it. But Sermon graded it out last, if you look at, PFF and the way they grade, the backs, Sermon graded out as an 84.7. That's 13th in the NCAA over the last 4 seasons of football. You had to have at least 50 attempts in the way I filtered that out. In just 2021, he graded as the 9th best outside zone back. The 49ers utilized outside zone. Like Jay said, they do other things, but it was the 4th most, 39.9%, of their rushing plays were outside zone or based off of outside zone concept. So he's a great fit. I like Sermon better than Williams because I think Melvin Gordon's more of a roadblock to Williams than a guy like Mostert is to Sermon. And it's not that I don't like Mostert, but again, there's really not much draft capital or money or anything put into Mostert, right? They gave him some money to make him happy last year to keep him around, but he wasn't able to stay healthy. He is a home run hitter, but like Sermon is the guy that would it surprise me by week 4 or 5, he's just taking over the backfield? No, it wouldn't. Would it surprise me if it's a committee between those two guys all year long? No, it wouldn't. They're both within the range of outcomes, but I think you're more likely to get what you're looking for, even if it's a bye week filler and then a guy you just want to keep on your bench in case he explodes, which is, I think, the low end of what you get with Trey Sermon. Whereas Javonte Williams, I think you potentially get a guy that you just can't even hardly use. Yes, you're waiting on him to blow up, but you won't really have any utilization for him otherwise. I think there's just a better chance for Sermon to overtake Mostert than there is Williams. For Gordon, unless something does happen with Gordon with the DUI or something that, unforeseen, that just he gets suspended or something longer than we think. And that opens that door for Williams just to take over. Anything can happen. We're not talking in absolutes here, but for me, I like Sermon over Williams.
Let's move on to Michael Carter. He got drafted by the Jets in the 4th round. So this new staff, new scheme in New York brought in Tevin Coleman. You're still kicking around the Michael Pirine, who you took in the 4th round last year, and you've got Ty Johnson. So in steps Tar Heel Michael Carter, and Jay, people are going to say, okay, he walks into this, he's the man all of a sudden. The guy's only 5'8", 201, and people are like, oh, he's going to be the man. Well, meanwhile, the Eagles took a kid in Gainwell who's exactly the same size, and you're like, that's a 3rd down back. So, can this guy at his size be the man for the Jets, or is he just destined to kind of be a committee guy?
So I'm really high on Michael Carter. Sorry, I don't know if you saw that, man. There was a spider that was coming at me in the car, so I had a little emergency situation over here.
Did you get him?
I think so. I don't know, man. So he sort of disappeared, but I think I got him. We'll see.
I pray he crawls across the screen at some point. That's the image The video clip we'll use to promote
spiders in the car, a phrase that will never probably be duplicated on the hustle. You
That
own
might be
that one, Moyer.
That'll be on a new T-shirt.
Very, very random situation, I do admit. No, so back to Carter. That's what we're talking about, right? Michael Carter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is Michael Carter? I mean, he's as big as that spider. Can he be the lead back for the Jets?
No, I mean, I'm huge. I'm a huge Michael Carter fan. Again, just getting back to my process, he, for me, is the guy that I wouldn't be surprised to see him turn into sort of that surprise elite running back. You look back at the 2017 NFL draft where probably, one of the best running back classes of all time. You had Aaron Jones going in the 5th round. Alvin Kamara is going in the top of round 3. I'm not saying Carter is going to be those guys, but what I have come to appreciate in running backs and what I've seen play out for who is successful, who struggles, Carter checks a lot of the boxes in terms of his skill as a runner. People are like, oh, why are you excited about Carter? Well, I'm like, why are you excited about Javonte Williams? As I said, if you watch North Carolina, and maybe people don't, I think a lot of people don't necessarily watch a whole team's offense at the same time. They'll watch cut-ups of a certain player. So you're not really getting that one-to-one comparison. Michael Carter, when you watch North Carolina, was their starter. He was their more effective runner. But people say, he's small. He's not that fast. He's just above 200 pounds. He's running in the 4.5s. That's all stuff you see on film. He's not very strong. You'll see him get ragdolled every once in a while, which is the biggest point of concern for me is just his strength. But what is he? He is very good vision, up there with Sermon in terms of how he sees the field. I mentioned how much they have him. North Carolina had him run outside zone. It's because he's so good at processing defenders, manipulating second-level defenders. Even on gap runs where, I said it's sort of a one-block read. You're going either here or there. He's seeing things that are opening it up in a hole that he's not even supposed to be looking at, and he's taking that for a big run. And usually when you coach those runners, you don't want them to do that. But with him, he does it, and it pays off. So he's making decisions that are very, very advanced, not just for a college runner, but for any runner that you watch anywhere. His vision and decision-making and his efficiency are elite. And I don't say that lightly like that. There are very few guys that I've watched in college who see the field and attack it as well as Michael Carter does. He's also elusive. He has excellent balance, excellent feet. So for me, the question marks all relate to, will the coaches give him a chance? Because he's small, he's not that fast, and then he has 4th-round draft capital. For me, maybe I'm sort of justifying this a little bit. The Jets didn't have a 3rd-round draft pick. Usually NFL teams want to get contributors. If they think of a guy as a contributor, they'll have a top 3-round grade on him, usually 4th and lower. It's more backup special teamers. He was drafted at the top of round 4. The Jets didn't have a 3rd-round pick. The fact that they drafted him there makes me think they probably had a round 3 grade on him, which would change sort of how the team sees him. Like they see him as a contributor rather than a 4th-round draft pick. But even then, if you're talented enough, like Aaron Jones, very similar runner in terms of all the things I just said about Carter, Jones checked those same boxes. There is a chance to earn your keep, especially when you get to the competition he has in the backfield. LaMichael Pirine is not an NFL caliber runner. He's a backup caliber runner at best. Tevin Coleman, in his prime, was a committee guy. At this point in his career, he's a backup type. Ty Johnson is not nearly developed enough as a between the tackles runner to be a guy you rely on. So for me, Carter is head and shoulders above any of those guys in terms of his readiness for executing, again, an outside zone scheme, which is what Mike LaFleur, who comes over from the 49ers with head coach Robert Saleh, is going to install. So perfect scheme fit, not much competition. I love his talent. The only question for me is draft capital and how they view him as a runner because of his size. I think there's a chance that he, I see him as an excellent sleeper. Like he may not hit, but if he hits, he could hit big.
That's like the scene from the movie where he's like, they're like, F you, F you, F you, you're cool. He just goes around the Jets.
Jerry Maguire, man. Great call right there.
Yeah, I think with Carter, again, Jay's hitting on the right things here. For me, to his point, they didn't have a 3rd round pick. They took him in the 4th round. And as teams, buy more and more into not spending draft capital on backs, I think we're going to see more and more of this. So that could, generally speaking, like push backs down into the bottom end of the 1st round. Then guys going in the 2nd would have been the guys that used to go at the end of the 1st round. Guys that go, in the 3rd round, would have been the guys that went at the end of the 2nd round, and so on, right? So, I mean, you got to kind of, I haven't done the calculus on any of that yet. I mean, it's something I would like to dig into as we get more data over the next few seasons, as the league, changes, or maybe it doesn't. We'll have to see what happens with it. But I think the key that I love with Carter is there's not a lot of competition, so that makes the draft capital not bother me as much, because there's not a Melvin Gordon, or somebody like that, standing in his way. And when I look at what the Jets have from an offensive scheme, people have to remember that they do have a new coordinator, and everything's going to be tied to the run game, right? Everything is meant to look the same. That's going to be there to help Zach Wilson. So you're coming from the offense they ran with Gase, didn't have a lot of motion, had a lot of stagnant sets, mostly all 11 personnel. Now you're going to see way more 12. They haven't signed a fullback. I don't know if they're going to try to use maybe like a Trevon Wesco or somebody like that, more as like a Kyle Juszczyk kind of move around guy that can also block some. I'm not claiming to know that, Wesco can even block. I have no clue, but I just look at their roster and try to think like what creatively, how they might handle that. But they do have enough, personnel to run more 12 personnel. Which, side plug for Chris Herndon, who Ian Hartitz always loves. So we got to get that in there. But think about this, so San Francisco, everything they do to help their back straight, we've talked about it all the time. So last year they were number 1 in shift and motion, 75%. They bunched the receivers 34%. They face base personnel, the 4th most in the league, right? So that helps the receivers out. But they give a trick look. Their trick look plays number 5 in the league. So they're constantly giving the defense something to think about, right? And being able to diagnose the play and to create, an illusion something's going one way or a certain thing's happening when it's really another. And that's just an advantage for any player that gets to play in that offense. That's the coach giving you an immediate head start. And that's what coordinators really should all be doing, and there's other ways to do it besides just what Shanahan does. But if you're not doing those sort of things, in my mind, and you're just asking your, quarterback to come out and, settle everything on his own, and you're not giving him these advantages, that you're really putting your team at a disadvantage. But it's huge for the backs. And I think it's proven. I mean, we don't need to name all the backs that have been in this scheme. We could sit here all night, but I think, from that aspect, Carter's in a great spot. And what's his ADP right now, Drake, in redraft?
End of the 9th round, currently in best ball, RB 34.
They won't stay there.
No, that's going
Sermon,
right.
And he won't stay there. So we talk about this with drafting. So if you want to own a few teams, and best ball is a great way to do it, because then you don't have to manage it. Like if you want to draft those guys at that spot, you got to do it now, because they're going to start creeping up into the 8th to the 7th to the 6th. Like I promise you, one long run from Sermon, he's going to catapult up into the 6th round. And then if there starts to be any kind of talk from beat writers, he's going to move up into the 5th round, the 4th round. He and Mostert will flip. Mm-hmm. Actually, maybe I should make a gentleman's bet with Jay. I bet they flip before the season gets here in their ADP. Like they'll switch spots. But it's so if you want them, and you can go do some drafting now, now's the time to do it early.
You want to talk about flipping spots? You guys might have been listening to this show and you're like, man, oh man, we're 40 minutes into the show. I haven't heard about the running back that has been all over my television the last 3 years, and that's Travis Etienne from Clemson. And this might stun some people. So you remember last year, this guy named James Robinson came out of nowhere and finished as the PPR RB7. All right. So everyone's like, that's great, Jacksonville. What a little find here for James Robinson. James Robinson in best ball in the last week is coming off the board, end of the 4th round. He's running back 23. Guess who running back 22 is? Travis Etienne, who was just drafted to the same backfield, coming off the board, middle of the 4th round, on pick 4-8 on average. That is crazy to me, gentlemen. You can't have 2 backs that are going neck and neck with each other, especially in the 4th round on a team that's probably going to suck. So, this has got to get blown up. Someone's going to lose a ton of value on their fantasy team when they realize, crap, I just drafted this Jags
I don't know what the data is you're looking at, Drake, like if you did it just since the draft has occurred.
The last 5 days.
Last 5 days. Okay.
Yep.
So, my guess is that Robinson's going to continue to fall, and just because of the way, all this stuff works, and Etienne will continue to rise. Etienne will move to the 3rd round. James Robinson will then be, the 5th, 6th round guy, that you're drafting. I'm just thinking historically how these things play out. That's what I would say most likely is going to happen. But, never mind that. I do want to hear, Jay's thoughts, because Matt Waldman, who we highly respect, was on the show, and he didn't have a lot of he didn't just trash Etienne or anything, but he felt he was overrated. And now we have somebody else that we highly respect, kind of coming to a similar conclusion. So Jay, just fill the audience in on what do you see with Etienne? What do you think he can do well, and then what are some of the limitations that you see, and why you've got him ranked number 5 here out of these backs, even though he has that 1st round capital?
Yeah, so I'll use this opportunity. I'll use this as an opportunity to plug the Fantasy Football Astronauts Rookie Guide. You contributed to that this offseason, put it out a few weeks ago before the draft, where I really studied the quarterbacks and the running backs. Travis Etienne was not in my top 5 running backs in terms of just grading his film. For me, I can't remember a running back who had such a mismatch between what he actually does and brings to the table and what the perception of him is. I think that people think that he is an elite college running back, and a really excellent pro prospect, and that's obviously how he was drafted. I just do not see it. I don't see it at all. I don't. I tried. When it comes to looking at running backs, I'm a slave to my process. So I chart the plays. I watch the whole offense. Look for specific things. It's all, taking a cue from Waldman. It's all laid out ahead of time. It's not opinion. It's not sort of, yes, some of it is subjective because I'm interpreting the stuff, but it's a very well laid out process. So I'm looking for certain things. The things that I value the most in runners is that vision, that decision-making, the efficiency that I already talked about with Carter and Sermon, whereas I don't see it in Javonte Williams or even Najee Harris to that same degree. So for me, Etienne is sort of in the middle of the pack when it comes to that. He'll find the hole most of the time, but he's not manipulating second level defenders. He makes some inefficient decisions. And when I'm watching this is like 6 inches to the right or left in a hole. It's not super obvious. No one talks about it in terms of like running back evaluation. It's all size, speed in terms of the stuff you hear when you're watching the draft, all that stuff. But he's middle of the pack for me in that sense. I also look at how players deal with collisions. How do they break tackles? Are they elusive? Are they able to run through tacklers who are defensive linemen, linebackers, whether that's coming from an angle, a leg tackle, or they're coming head on? Etienne is one of the worst runners that I've seen and graded when it comes to dealing with tacklers who are coming head on. He's not elusive. He doesn't understand a term that I use and Waldman also uses is micro movement. So how do players dictate tackling angles, with their shoulder pads, their legs? He takes hits square to the chest, gets his pads high. He actually decelerates into contact. These are all things that I'd say the only guy worse that I've seen in the NFL is Kalen Ballage in terms of dealing with contact. Kalen Ballage is a guy who would also slow down and sort of take square hits to the chest, decelerate. So for me, he's like in, not even in an NFL caliber tier for how he deals with collisions. People talk about his contact balance. I think I see what they're talking about because you'll see highlights of him where he's running through leg tackles. There's that one highlight, I think it's against Virginia Tech, where he's running out to the left, sort of off tackle. He gets hit by a couple guys in his legs, spins, and keeps going for the touchdown. For me, yes, that's a highlight play, and he did it, but there are a lot more examples on film where he tries to do spins, where he tries to break tackles, and it just doesn't work. So, for that is like really bad.
Hey, Jay, just real quick, have you had a chance to really look at the RSP? you're going to be in love with what, and this is a plug for Matt Waldman. If you don't already own the RSP, why you should, because of the type of data that he's now tracking. So he's actually looking at, reaches broken versus linemen, linebackers, and DBs. And so when you look at Etienne, he's the middle of the pack, breaking tackles versus reaches. If you look at him versus, linebackers, again, middle of the pack for guys with at least 10 attempts that he graded on film. And then if you look at it versus DBs, he's again, middle of the pack. Now that's on reaches, but when you come down here and you start to look at, wraps, only 6% versus defensive linemen, which is harder. And that is one where Williams and Sermon did much better. And then if you look at wraps versus linebackers, Etienne's only 5%, where the top guy, Sermon's up at 13%, Williams was at 22%. And then if you keep going on down against DBs, actual wraps, even against the DBs, Etienne struggled 0%. He had 30 of those opportunities and he broke them 0% of the time. So the same very thing that you're talking about, Matt outlines, and he's got it in data. He also talks about, hits bounced by defender type, so we're basically, you see the back run into, the defender and they have this collision and one of them's left standing. And you look at the way Etienne graded out, from that perspective, and it also wasn't good. So all of these contact numbers didn't look good when Matt really broke them down into reaches versus wraps versus true collisions. So it all lines up with the stuff that you're talking about here.
I mean, that Matt Waldman guy knows what he's doing.
Wait till you see where he's got when he ranks all of the rookies. I'm not going to give it away. You got to go to mattwaldmanrsp.com and find out. But when I opened it up and I looked to try to find Etienne compared to where he is on every other site in terms of rookie rankings, it will shock you.
No, this is not hyperbole. Travis Etienne, for my money, is terrible at breaking tackles, at dealing with contact. I can't emphasize it enough. It's really bad. It's Kalen Ballage tier. And
the man has a family. Come on.
Oh man, when you get Jay to invoke Kalen Ballage, it's getting bad.
Now Ballage has other issues that Etienne does not have, but in terms of saying, oh, he's this. Don't get me started on contact balance. Contact balance, I think, is a term that people use to describe running backs who produce, but they don't really know why. So they're like, oh, Travis Etienne's really fast. Well, then he runs a 4.5. He's not as fast as people think he is. So then they say, oh, he has great contact balance. But I think a lot of times it's just sort of this nebulous term. Whereas when you really look at the data like Matt Waldman does, where you really watch him play after play after play, there is nothing special about Travis Etienne's contact balance. In fact, I think that's one of his biggest weaknesses is his ability to break tackles. So the idea that he is this special open field weapon, even his receiving skill, Clemson threw him the ball a lot. He's not a good receiver. He doesn't run good routes. He really struggles tracking the ball, anything beyond 5 yards downfield. Any over the shoulder catch, he's probably not even going to make contact with the ball. It's really, really bad ball tracking. So I don't see him as, I just see him as a backup caliber NFL running back. And then James Robinson doesn't have any of the draft capital, but James Robinson is a very good runner. When the Jags drafted Etienne, I tweeted out, James Robinson is better than Etienne. And for my money, he is a much better all-around running back than Travis Etienne. They drafted.
I know you don't have a crystal ball. You don't get to be on the phone with these teams, but why do they do things like this? When you have a back that's that cheap, like Robinson, they've already produced. You have so many other needs if you're the Jaguars. Why do you take Etienne? And how can their process be so off? And not to say that he couldn't turn some things around and end up being a good pro, and then everybody will bring this episode up, and bash us. But how does that happen?
Well, first of all, running back production in the NFL, 80% of it is the offensive line. The extra 20% is where the running back talent makes a difference. A guy that I've criticized a lot, on your boys Eagles here is Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders he's produced. He's had production in the NFL, but it's not that he is this special back. a lot of it just has to do with the Eagles' run scheme. You know, Doug Peterson was smart. They let him do gap runs, which really suited him. He is an explosive runner. So guys will produce as long as they're getting blocking. Like, he's good enough. Most NFL runners, you see LaMichael P. Ryan, I said he's a backup NFL runner. He produced when he got opportunities because, you know, there were holes there. So if he produces, it doesn't prove anything. It's a good way to say, no matter what, I can always be right.
but why do you grab a guy like Etienne when
No.
James Robinson already did what he did?
Now to your actual question.
Thank you.
I have no idea. I have no idea why teams do this. They have found money, man. It's like if someone gave you what's a really good car? Like an Audi coupe. Someone gave it to you for free. And then you're like, well, I'm going to go buy a Ferrari. And you're like, why buy a Ferrari? You just got an Audi for free. Like, you don't need to spend that money on something else, you know?
And it's almost really more like, yeah. But you're also not getting a Ferrari.
Yeah, he's not a Ferrari. It's like a Hummer, you know, some big, clunky, like, what are you even thinking about?
We're going to get you a sponsorship from a car dealership from coming on these
seriously,
these
Jay,
shows.
Yeah.
No,
that and bug spray.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. My Subaru Ascent, 8-seater.
Subaru and Raid coming to you guys next. As far as our sponsors.
Promo code Hustle to get half off Raid this week at Ace Hardware.
But look at a team that I think really is doing a great job is the Dolphins, and I'm not a running backs don't matter guy at all. Like, I love running backs. Everybody knows it. I think running backs matter. That said, that doesn't mean you have to spend a bunch of draft capital on running backs.
Yep.
I think that there's a lot of opportunity to get good running backs cheap because I think a lot of people, even in the NFL, don't really understand what makes running backs good. I've talked about this with Dalvin Cook a lot. I think a lot of people think Dalvin Cook is good because he's really fast. He's not that fast. He's fast enough. What he is he has excellent feet, excellent vision. He's insanely efficient with how he identifies and attacks holes, and that's why he's good. But I think there are a lot of people that don't. Well, first of all, nobody ever talks about that with running backs, and so I think a lot of people don't. I think
it's because it's hard to quantify. People don't know how to quantify it, Jay. So I think that's why I love. I mean, that's how I first found Jay on Twitter way back when. I think I was, maybe I was in your first 500 followers. I feel really privileged. Like, now you're like way up over 10K. And I remember just watching your videos and I'm like, I'm not getting this kind of information, like especially around running back. You do great stuff on all the positions, but your running back stuff, like, just, mesmerized me. I'm like, I'm not getting this information anywhere else, like, period, on the internet. And there's this guy from Twitter streaming it, making these videos, and you make them on your phone, which even more blows my mind how you do this. And you make all this because it looks so professionally done, and you're doing it all from your iPhone. I mean, if you guys haven't checked out Jay on Twitter at Jay Moyer, you're missing out on so much good content. Obviously, check out Fantasy Football Astronauts, where you can get even way more. Sorry, Jay, I had to give you a plug because it is awesome. And I think people don't know, to your point, what you're talking about. And I don't think I really understood it until I started watching, and I learned a lot of it from you and then also from Matt and a few other people. But you just don't really see that many people that can also, and I think some people may know it, but I think it's also a difficult concept, like, to get across, right, in verbal or written form to help other people understand. And I think you do a good job of that.
No, man, that's very flattering. I do have to give a hat tip to Waldman because I had a lot of these ideas in my head, but again, like you said, expressing them and really making them like tangible things that I look at in running backs, I hadn't really done that. And the key to unlocking that whole process and even designing my whole process was really getting introduced to Matt's work, seeing the stuff he does. I mean, he just does such a great job of defining everything. I mean, can't recommend Matt Waldman.
For you guys that don't know, Jay is a former high school coach. He's also a doctor. You never hear him talk about that. So he's a smart guy. He knows football. That's why he's so good at this stuff. All right,
let's get back to the football here.
Yeah, he doesn't like Jay's blushing, guys. The spiders, now creeping towards a red face, Jay.
My face does look very red. You're making me blush.
All right, Drake, get us on track, man.
So let's talk quickly about
wait.
some.
Let me say one last thing here before you cut me up.
Please.
No, I think for me, since I've really started studying it, the thing that stands out about the best runners in the NFL are the guys like Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Nick Chubb. They're the guys who really see it. They really understand how to attack a defense, both looking at things pre-snap, but then also after the snap, anticipating, running to leverage. Matt Waldman, again, bringing him up, he defined it in a way that made a lot of sense to me. Does he run to space or does he run to leverage? Running to leverage means you're anticipating where the space is going to be. A lot of runners see where it's open now. They're going there. By the time they get there, the hole has moved. So those are the guys who are consistently the best runners in the NFL. A lot of guys who people wonder why they're inconsistent. Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, guys who have a ton of talent, but people are like, what the heck is wrong with them? Those are the guys who need to run to space. They don't run with that same anticipation, the same refinement that a lot of those guys who are not the same caliber athlete, but are consistently the most productive backs in the NFL. And I mean, to be honest, for me, it's a huge edge for the fantasy football player to understand this because, like we said, nobody really talks about it. With running backs, everybody talks about size, speed, pass catching, and those things are important to a certain extent. But I think really getting into the finer points of running back play, it's like with Michael Carter. Here's an opportunity with a guy who I think has the potential to hit really big as a fourth-round draft pick. It doesn't always pan out. Phillip Lindsay is another guy who does it really well and really flashed early, but he's very slight of frame, so he's had some injury issues. He's not a guy they're going to hitch their wagon to as a bell cow. But Jay, it really helps you identify those sleepers.
Just real quick, because I know Brian's going to yank us and move us forward. Is there another back or two, and maybe they went way later, but when you watched them, you saw that they had these traits? And just a couple of names, and there may not be any, so don't force it. But if there are some, just throw them out there for the listeners so they can keep them in mind. And if you want to keep a few of them secret where they need to go subscribe, right, to the Fantasy Football Astronauts, that's also okay. So
and why is one Kenny Gainwell?
Well, you shouldn't have said that because actually the two guys that I would say that really have this a little bit in terms of maybe not consistently, but show promise are one, Kenny Gainwell, and two, Jermar Jefferson. Gainwell, he played 1 year. He wasn't a running back in high school, but he really shows flashes of having the ability to manipulate second-level defenders, set up blocks. Struggled a little bit when it's tight quarters between the tackles, but I think that's something that will come with experience because he shows the ability to do it. Jermar Jefferson really runs to leverage well, is very efficient. He's sort of limited. I think he really only fits in like an outside zone run scheme. Struggles with a lot of the other schemes. He's not a great pass catcher, not a great pass blocker. So I see why he went in the 7th round, but just in terms of being an efficient runner, I think he's a guy that will probably be a backup type for his career. But when he plays, he'll do better than people expect him to, sort of like an Alfred Morris type. Nate Tice, who's on Twitter, put me on that comparison, and I think it's a really good comparison. Just a good decision maker, gets north-south quickly. So those are two guys I think do that pretty well and have a chance to surprise some people.
You went over the quarterbacks at FF Astronauts, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your top 5 quarterbacks. And if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you, and please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. But Justin Fields is the cover boy for this show because I make the graphics. And that was the first guy I could find. So I'd love to hear your ranking of these guys. We've talked about Trey Lance on the last show. Fields, I'm a huge fan of. Lawrence went number 1 overall. So if you could just give us in a dynasty draft your top 5 quarterback ranking.
In a dynasty draft, I would have Fields at 1. I don't know. It's tough for me between Lance and Lawrence. I would probably lean Lance, have Lawrence there at 3, then Zach Wilson at 4, Mac Jones at 5. I think the top 3 are pretty close. For me, there's a gap at number 4. I think I think there's a good chance that Zach Wilson is a bust. I mean, I see why people like him. He's very talented. I'm just not completely sold. He really struggled when things were tough his first 2 years. Last year, he had it really, really easy. Put up big numbers there. I'm not sure that the way he plays quarterback with his body and his athletic profile is going to carry over to the NFL.
Thank you. Finally, someone else is on my side here. I think this kid sucks. I couldn't believe when they took him number 2. Everyone's hyping him up. I'm like, it almost becomes one of those things where just because everyone says it, now it's just taken as a fact. Like, oh no, the Jets are taking him too. So everyone just goes, well, he's the second best quarterback in this. Give me Justin Fields over him every day of the week. Like it blew my mind. Plus I want the kid's paper route when he goes off to the Jets, but that's neither here nor there.
No, I mean, for me, it's really bizarre what people really start to fixate on with draft season. With Justin Fields, it was his processing, right? Everybody says he's a really bad processor. And why do they say that? Well, he had a couple bad games. Like you watch his game against Indiana, and he did struggle at times to decide and figure out where to throw the ball. But let me tell you, Indiana, as far as college defenses go, they run a very complex scheme. They're very sound. They're a very well-coached defensive team. They're a good defensive team. It was early in the season, COVID offseason. Ohio State's passing game in that game was much simpler than what they showed later on in the year. And for me, it looked like Justin Fields really figured it out about 2/3, 3/4 through the season. His processing sped up. You see him in the college football playoff. He's a different guy. And for me, when he shows that ability later on, I say, okay, he can do it. It just has to become consistent. And I think, saying someone can't do something versus saying someone doesn't do it all the time is very different. And then when you factor in his accuracy, his arm strength, his physical abilities in general, I mean, the dude runs a 4.4. He's a very good runner. Lawrence and Trey Lance are also good runners, which is why for me, they're in that tier above the 4 and 5, especially for fantasy, where obviously running is so valuable. And then I think the thing that Fields does very well that not many people talk about, he is a very committed pocket passer. And I think a lot of the issues with processing were that he just tries to take plays even when they're not there. And I think that that's something that's easier to coach someone out of as opposed to just not seeing it. I don't think he doesn't see it because you have plays where he's going through, a set progression. There's 4 men in the route. No matter what the defense is, you're reading 1, 2, 3, 4. You see him in the college football playoff again, hit Chris Olave down the middle of the field for a 60-yard post as the 4th option in his read. That's super impressive. Matt Nagy talked about that as one of the reasons they drafted him, was because he showed the ability to do that and throw just a ridiculous pass from the pocket. He feels the rush well. He has good feet. He like I said, he's looking to throw even when he shouldn't. And I think it's easier to coach him out of that. So I think he took a lot of unfair criticism. Whereas Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, some of the things you could critique in their game, they sort of get glossed over. I don't know why it plays itself out the way that it does, but in the NFL, you see Mitch Trubisky go ahead of Deshaun Watson, who was the best college quarterback for the whole time he was at Clemson, and Patrick Mahomes, who people weren't as high on, but he was also very, very good in college, and obviously now has become what he is. And I mean, you go back and watch Trubisky's film and compare it to Mahomes' film from when they're in college, it's not even close. So I don't know why narratives take hold. I think a lot of it has to do with post-draft interviews. I don't think post-draft interviews are a great tool if you're an NFL team, because when you're interviewing someone, it's subject to a lot of bias. Does this person click with you on an emotional or spiritual or whatever level? Those things have nothing to do with playing quarterback. Lamar Jackson was ripped for being a bad interviewer in the pre-draft process. He failed to pick 32. Okay, Lamar Jackson may not interview well, but he's an elite athlete. He's one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. So who knows why things happen, but it creates an opportunity for teams who know what they're doing, like the Chiefs and the Saints or whatever, to really be good every year. Bad teams stay bad, good teams stay good.
I equate it to politics in a way where you get these pundits out there at the ESPNs, NFL networks of the world, some of these mouthpieces who are handed information and they run with it, and it becomes the narrative, and it becomes kind of the truth during this draft season. I also go back to, I don't think the majority of people know what the hell they're looking at. People don't have the trained eye, as I like to say, like you or a Waldman or a Greg Cosell or people like that. So they don't know anything. They're just some idiot like me, and they just watch it and they go, oh, okay, this guy looks good. He can throw with no shirt on across his body 60 yards into a trash can or whatever these guys are doing these days. So it becomes kind of this, just, I don't know, this weird area where nobody knows what the hell they're talking about, and we just grasp onto the first thing that anyone says. We go, yeah, that guy's smart. I'm gonna go with what he says. When in reality, it's like the 49ers just fooling everybody with this Mac Jones nonsense. Nobody thought they were taking Mac Jones at 2. I mean, geez Louise, watch Mac Jones play versus any of these other guys. Watch their offense. What are we talking about? Mac Jones at 2. But everybody took it and they go, oh no, Adam Schefter tweeted it out. They're going to take Mac Jones at 2. Get out of here.
I mean, I think Waldman really, again, he keeps coming up, obviously, because he does such great work. He talks about this a lot, sort of how NFL processes work. So you'll have your scouts who are scouting college players the whole year. They do all their work. Then it gets to the offseason. Okay, the decision makers are now the head coach and the general manager. I read about, how Kyle Shanahan came to decide they want Trey Lance. And I love Kyle Shanahan as an offensive coordinator. He's one of the best offensive minds in the game. But he was talking about his process. He's on vacation watching quarterback prospects, like on his laptop. Is he charting them? No, he has a little blurb on each screen for each play where he can write notes on the play. So there's no organization. There's no standard. He's not grading them on a certain rubric for, okay, these are the qualities I'm looking for. How consistent. You look at Waldman's grading in the RSP. It's like super micro detailed. These teams are not doing that. It's all an emotional. It's all a viewing thing. Shanahan even talked about it. He said, I can watch a guy and convince myself I can fall in love with him, any of these 5 guys. And then I have to remind myself to not fall in love with him. So there's no process at all. It's just him watching and deciding, with no set, like there's no set framework for how he's going to come to a decision. Him deciding, okay, this is the guy I want. And he convinced himself because Trey Lance can run. He throws a nice deep ball. He interviews well. He's very smart. He wanted to like him because of X, Y, and Z. So is that a good way to make a decision? I would argue no. It's not a good way to make a decision when you're trying to find good football players. But these NFL teams, despite having all the resources, don't seem to want to really standardize their decision-making process. I don't think that I'm on any level as far as what Matt Waldman does, but that's a big thing for what we do at Fantasy Football Astronauts. Myself, Jetpack Galileo, at Jetpack Galileo on Twitter, who prefers to go by his Italian pseudonym. But it's really about trying to objectify the player grading process by having strict criteria, having a rubric on which you grade players, rather than just saying, oh, I saw Travis Etienne run this 60-yard touchdown. I really like Travis Etienne, and now I'm going to bat for him.
But Jay, isn't it like a lot of the scouts do have a process, but it just gets thrown out the window based on the way decisions get made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
so it's not so much that there's not a process in place. It's the folks that do use the process and follow the process don't end up having the strongest voice at the end of the day. And then you have these decisions that are really not based on all the facts and the process. Mm-hmm. And the decision maker carries more weight, right, in the room in the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, it gets back to the overall organizational process, right? One, it's probably not standardized. These scouts probably do have an individual process, but it's probably not standardized. There's probably not much teaching, and you hear right. Scouts talk about this. There's not teaching. No one's saying, okay, these are the things we're looking for. I want you to grade them on decision-making. Okay. What's their pre-snap decision-making? Well, how is their post-snap decision-making? How is the decision-making when the pre-snap picture is different than the post-snap picture? No one's defining those. So they come up with their own criteria. And again, different teams do different things. But my understanding and hearing Waldman and hearing people who have actually worked for the NFL is it's a team by team, scout by scout decision maker by decision maker process. In general, it's not standardized. Even if a scout has a process, which probably a lot of them do have very detailed processes. Again, it gets back to like Kyle Shanahan. Is he looking at their process and using that? No. Now that it's the offseason, he's watching them and saying, okay, who do I like?
Yeah, but it's also like, are they even looking at the right things? Some scouts have been doing something for so long, it's just because that's what they've been doing. But it could just, what they are waiting could be complete noise based on these 3 instances they remember in their head that, oh, this guy had this trait, and now all of a sudden that's overweighted, right, in the process. And I think that's honestly why sometimes, the film stuff gets a bad name, and for a good reason, right, is where is the process, where's the rigor? But the folks that really do a good job with it, like you and Matt and folks that collect the data, right? And that's the thing with Pro Football Focus, that I like. And I know, not everybody agrees on every metric that Pro Football Focus puts out there. But what I'll say with Pro Football Focus is, where do people think these grades and things are coming from? And even just get rid of the grades, but like literally they're taking what they see on film, right? And they're charting it and they're charting all of it. So at least you have like all of this data that you can start to learn from, and they're constantly iterating, on the process. And that's what I love about what you do, and like you said, Matt takes it to like the nth degree, and like the new stuff he puts in the RSP every year, like it was quarterback stuff over the last 2 years, the pinpoint accuracy versus general accuracy. Now you're seeing this stuff with the running backs, and it's stuff I was begging Matt for this stuff like 3 years ago. I was like, Matt, I know you have to have this data, like let's figure out how to like get it into a form that people can consume. So yeah, I'm totally with you. I know we're like at an hour and 15, and I know, Jay, you haven't looked at a ton of receivers. You mostly you spent most of your time, on the quarterbacks and on the running backs, but any of the receivers you want to hit on? And I just had one quick thing that, kind of caught my attention, on draft weekend, and you've heard some other people talk about it. So any prospects you want to talk about, but just this general theme of, man, I've never seen this many small, fast receivers go like in the second round and third round. I don't know if it was more just to do with this is what this class had to offer. And I need to go back and dig into this more, like historically from a draft perspective, but or are we seeing the league start to evolve, right? As there's new rules around, what defenders can do hitting people, right? And most of it's to clean up concussions and injuries, which is good, right, for the players and for the league. But it could create this situation where players that maybe used to not be able to thrive in the league now can, or maybe it won't. I don't think we really know yet, but I would love to hear, your thoughts on that. I know you also have some thoughts about quarterbacks. But in the last few minutes here, anything on the receiver trends you're seeing and any particular players that you just want to, talk about?
Yeah, for me, I think the receiver trends, I think what teams really look for is the ability to separate and the ability to run after the catch. Those are the 2 things that NFL teams in the past few years really seem to me to value the most. On top of that, it's just like measurables, speed, right? Obviously, Henry Ruggs was the first receiver off the board last year. You watch his film, he didn't deserve to be the first receiver off the board. You see with guys like Jefferson and, some very good CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy had better film. And those guys all went, well behind where Ruggs went and had better rookie years. So the measurables still definitely play a role. I think part of it, though, in this class, there are a lot of small receivers, and the guys who do those things, who show the ability to separate and show that they can run after the catch, are smaller guys. Like Kadarius Toney, what does he have? He has highlights of him running after the catch. Mm-hmm. He goes in the first round. Teams have seen, everybody wants the next Tyreek Hill. They convince themselves that this guy's the next Tyreek Hill. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants the next A.J. Brown, the guy that's going to, take a 10-yard crosser and break a tackle and take it to the house. Well, Jamar Chase may not be A.J. Brown. Kadarius Toney definitely is not Tyreek Hill. So those are what teams are looking for. In terms of these receivers, I think it's interesting because, you talk about landing spots for running backs. I think that's justified to put a good amount of weight on the landing spot. Receivers, I think you either make it or you don't. Justin Jefferson didn't have a good landing spot last year. Doesn't matter. He's a good receiver. CeeDee Lamb has Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. Doesn't matter. He's a very good receiver. Receiver is such a skilled position that you sort of either sink or swim. Antonio Brown was a 6th-round pick. Did he not make it because he didn't get opportunity? No, he made it because he's a damn good receiver. Whereas a running back, the margin is not nearly as wide between, Antonio Brown and the 32nd best receiver, or at running back, it's not nearly as wide as Antonio Brown and the 32nd receiver. So receivers, it's a lot on the individual. So I think, again, it creates an opportunity to get those guys who are thought of as like bad landing spots. A guy I really like in this draft is Elijah Moore, drafted in the 2nd round to the Jets. The Jets just signed Corey Davis. They have Denzel Mims. They have Jamison Crowder. They have a new coach, a rookie quarterback. So you don't really, it's the Jets, right? So you don't think of it as a good landing spot. I think that he's talented enough to really establish himself as a go-to receiver in the NFL. So, just things like that I'll comment on overall. Javonte Smith, I think, is another guy whose craft is underrated. He's criticized for being small, but he's really tough. He's really crafty, excellent route runner, catches everything. He's much faster.
You were saying last year when you were watching Judy and Ruggs that he was the best receiver on that team. I remember that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure, last year, Alabama thought of him as their leading receiver. Tua thought of him as his number one receiver. And you can just see it by, who do they target when they need a big play? Who's he throwing it to when they're guarded? Devontae Smith was the guy that didn't need to be open. He's still getting the targets. Jerry Jeudy's getting it if he's wide open, but he's not the guy getting, okay, nobody's open, I'm going to throw it up. That was all going to Devontae Smith. So I really do love Devontae Smith. Jalen Waddle is a guy who has a ton of talent. Didn't really put it together consistently at Alabama because of injuries and situation, competition, whatever. But just in terms of the explosiveness, the change of direction, I think he has all of the ingredients there. He's not like a Ruggs where he's fast, but he can't change direction. He actually has excellent change of direction skill. So he's a guy I think that, there's super high upside. So I see why Miami would want to take him. Jamar Chase is a bit of a wild card for me because, we have 1 year of film on him when he's 19 years old playing at LSU, lighting things on fire, really just tearing it up. But you see his route tree. It's pretty simple. He's running a lot of slants. He's running a lot of goes, a lot of it off RPOs, where he's just sort of open, or, his like fade routes where he's not open, but he just sort of catches the ball. Would he have developed as a route runner in this past season? We don't know because he sat the year out. So, I think he's insanely physically talented. He tracks the ball well. He does a lot of things well. But I have questions about his ability to get off press, his ability to create separation. He could be a souped up AJ Brown, or he could be a guy that really struggles to get open and establish himself in the NFL. So I see why he's picked so early. I see he has crazy upside, but I don't think it's a lock that he'll be, a top 10 to 15 NFL receiver.
Any thoughts, Jay, on Rondell Moore, and him landing in Arizona?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think Rondell Moore in Arizona is a home run. Like fit. I talked about like fit not really mattering for receivers. And I think in general, that's true. When you talk about like an air raid guy, they're really looking for someone who can work underneath the quick passing game, run after the catch. We know Rondell can do that at a very, very, excellent to elite level. I think he has some upside as a downfield receiver. He's flashy ability to track the ball well. He didn't run a super diverse route tree, but when he's asked to do it, he showed some nuance to his routes. But again, I think that, being an underneath guy in an air raid, it's a bit of a different like scheme scenario than being a guy who's working out one-on-one and you have to beat a press corner. A guy like Justin Jefferson who could just get open against man-to-man coverage. It's a bit different when you're in such a scheme-heavy, underneath passing attack, like what the air raid wants to be. So I think in that sense, Rondell is a great fit for what they're looking for, and in that sense could then earn a lot of targets in the short passing game, and has the ability after the catch to really do something with that.
That's just some great stuff there. And Dwayne and I will dive a lot deeper into these second, third, fourth round wide receivers as we go forward here. But when you've got a guy with the knowledge of Jay Moyer at running back and at quarterback, we really got to, milk it for all we can. So, Jay, we can't thank you enough for taking an hour and a half out of your day, and you're on the West Coast, for talking about these prospects with us. If you're not following Jay on Twitter, you're doing something wrong. It's at Jay Moyer, just the letter J, Moyer. And of course, he's with our great friends, Jetpack Galileo, over there at FF Astronauts, ffastronauts.com. They're at FF_astronauts. Their YouTube channel, guys, off the charts. The stuff you can learn over there. If you want to become a smarter fantasy player or just a smarter football player in general, definitely go check that out. Anything else, Dwayne, before we got here?
Justin Fields is in our chat room, and he agrees with you. He's the best quarterback. He says he's better than Trevor Lawrence. So just so you know.
I saw Justin Fields chiming in there earlier, so I'm sure that's the real Justin Fields and not someone pretending.
Get him on the air, Brian. Get him on the air, Brian.
Yeah, we'll get him. Why he's here? The rookies don't make that money anymore. He needs that 25% off promo code. So, guys, we appreciate it. We'll keep rocking and rolling here all season long as we get into draft season. Holy moly, it'll be here before you know it. We're going to be doing best ball drafts live on the air. Maybe our friend Balboni shows up again, Dwayne.
Yeah, and this year, dude, we've got to have Jay on to do. Jay, are you going to do your projections again?
I will be doing projections.
I started working on mine last weekend after the draft. Like I finally, had enough to basically take my first pass at the rosters and start working through it. So we'll need to do an episode where we come on and we talk about projections. We may have to spread it out over a couple of episodes, Brian.
I'll pack a lunch. So,
hey man, I'm always up for it.
Cool. Again, guys, there's the rookie guide over at FF Astronauts. A lot of folks worked very hard on that. Go check it out. Well worth the money. So for Dwayne, for Jay, I am Brian. This is The Hustle. We appreciate you spending some time with us as you drive around or at the gym or whatever you're doing. Just go get vaccinated, be smart, and let's get out of the mess that we're in now.